Now with the Snare Saturday video 2 weeks ago, we did the evolution of the Ludwig Acrolite. And one thing that was a little alarming to me was that the Acrolite was made in 1963, and I was under the impression that it was made to be a more affordable option compared to the Ludwig Supraphonic. But the Ludwig Supraphonic wasn't introduced until 1964. So that got me thinking a little bit as an educator. Why do so many people believe that the Acrolite was designed after the Supraphonic? So in this Snare Saturday video, it's time to talk about the evolution of the Ludwig Supraphonic. Yo, what's going on everybody? Nick Costa here, and in this video we're going to talk about the history and evolution of the Ludwig Supraphonic, the most recorded snare drum of all time. In this video, we're going to talk about the origins and the iconic sound of the Supraphonic, the impact that it had on the drum industry, variations throughout the years, and the Supraphonic of today. Now, before we dive into this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button as well as the bell icon. That way you're notified of any additional content that I upload to the channel. Now, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I was always under the impression that the Ludwig Acrolite was designed to be a more affordable option to the Ludwig Supraphonic. And when I posted that video 2 weeks ago on the evolution of the Acrolite, it just didn't make sense to me because the Acrolite was introduced in 1963. And according to this shirt that I got from Ludwig, the Supraphonic was introduced in 1964. So that doesn't make any sense that the Acrolite was made after the Supraphonic. As a matter of fact, it was the reverse. So let's go ahead and dive into the origins of the Ludwig Supraphonic. The Supraphonic was introduced, like I just mentioned, in 1964. So let's go ahead and go back to the early 1900s, specifically 1914. That was the year that the beaded metal shell was designed to create a shell that was more durable than the older metal shells that just was a flat shell. This bead that was put in the middle of the shell was a structural component because metal shells back then were a top part and a bottom part that were welded together. By putting that bead and tack welding the top and bottom parts together gave you a stronger, more durable snare drum. Now, although that bead was originally put on the shell to make it a little bit more durable, it became a staple visually for Ludwig drums. Since all other metal drums at this time had a flat shell, you could easily identify that it was a Ludwig shell because it had that bead in the middle of it. Now, fast forward to 1935, and that is when the Imperial lug was made. However, Ludwig was under the CG Con ownership, which meant that that was showing up on the Ludwig and Ludwig branded drums. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because if you're unaware of the history of the Ludwig Drum Company, it exchanged hands of ownership a few times. This is why there are so many different names: Ludwig and Ludwig, Ledy and Ludwig, WFL, and the Ludwig Drum Company. Now, in the late 1950s, William F. Ludwig Sr. bought the rights back to the Ludwig name and was able to start using it as he was making drums. Around this time, he had the WFL Drum Company based out of Chicago. This is also when William F. Ludwig Sr. started transitioning the WFL Drum Company to the Ludwig Drum Company. Hence the transition era badge, which is a keystone badge with the Ludwig logo in a blue script font. Now, the Super Series drums were a beaded metal shell with double-sided Imperial lugs, and this is the first time that you see them on a Ludwig branded drum, along with a keystone badge. Now, before we continue on with this video, I wanted to take a moment to let you all know about the summer graduate course that I will be co-teaching alongside Mark DiCiani at Westchester University. And hang out with Mark and I for a week where you're going to get the opportunity to learn about drums, play drums, improve your abilities on the drum set, or prepare yourself for your students within your program. Now, there are two sections available: Drum Set Essentials and advanced drum set. So if you have not taken the class with us, Drum Set Essentials would be the one you want to sign up for. And advanced drum set is for those who already took the course with us but want to take it for an additional year. So for more information or to enroll in the courses, you can head over to wcupa.edu/music/WSMI.ASPX, or to make it easier, just look in the description below and click the link and come hang out with Mark and I for 1 week and learn how to play some drums. Now, let's get back to the video. These Super Ludwig shells were the first of its kind, where they were welded at the joint. They also had a stamped snare bed, which are those indentations that you see on some older snare drums, as well as Ludwig's P83 throw-off. So how did that drum end up becoming an aluminum drum known as the Supraphonic? Well, from 1961 to 1963, Ludwig started experimenting with different metal alloys. This is when they came up with a shell that was made out of aluminum. And like I mentioned in that Snare Saturday video 2 weeks ago, this was that acrolite material they were talking about, which was just aluminum. In 1963, Ludwig introduced the Acrolite, which was the first ever aluminum shell. And Ludwig was doing this because the cost of brass was going up, and they had to find something that was a little bit more affordable. This was also the time when Ludwig was starting to create seamless shells rather than welding them together. Additionally, rather than having the stamped snare beds, they had a gradual snare bed that was put in, kind of like the snare drums of today. So combining a chrome over aluminum shell with 10 double-sided imperial lugs and this new gradual snare bed, Ludwig was able to create a unique sound unlike anything else. What makes the Ludwig Supraphonic unique in regards to its sound is that there are no harsh overtones, and aluminum is pretty direct compared to, say, brass. So having a more direct sound with an aluminum drum, along with a clean, crisp tone that is provided by the seamless shell, and then finally these gradual snare beds, you have a direct sound with no harsh overtones and is also very sensitive. This allowed the Supraphonic to make a huge impact in the drum industry. And since this drum was introduced in the 60s, all drum sets made by Ludwig came with a Supraphonic. And if you think about all of the recordings of the 60s and even the 70s, you have drummers like Hal Blaine, Clyde Stubblefield, Karen Carpenter, and even John Bonham, who are all playing on countless records that a lot of people are listening to. And because this was all well documented, it's safe to say that the Supraphonic is the most recorded snare drum. Now let's go ahead and talk about the variations of the Supraphonic throughout the years. Like I mentioned earlier, the predecessor to the Supraphonic started out as the Super Ludwig, which was a welded brass shell. In 1964, the Supraphonic was introduced as a 10-lug seamless chrome over aluminum shell. And since the introduction, not much has really changed in regards to the shell. As a matter of fact, the changes are all for external components, like internal dampeners, throw-offs, and then of course the thickness of the triple flange hoops, because present-day triple flange hoops are thicker than the ones made back then. From 1964 to 1968, the Supraphonics were equipped with the baseball bat style internal dampener. Then in 1968, that's when they started to transition to the knob, aka the puck dampener. And of course, throughout this time, the P83 throw-off was the throw-off. 1970 is when you start to see the P85 throw-off come into play. This is also when you are starting to see the blue and olive pointed badge. Now, manufacturing of this shell was always a seamless shell. However, it was done differently depending on the era. This originally started out as a seamless spun shell and then transitioned to a deep drawn shell. Finally, they transitioned over to a hydroform shell, which is how they are made for today. The really cool thing about the Supraphonics of today is that they're not too far off from how they were made back in the 60s. They are still a 1.7 millimeter seamless chrome over aluminum shell, even though they are hydroformed rather than spun. They do have triple flange hoops, although, like I mentioned, they are 2.3 millimeters, so they're a tad bit thicker than they were back then. They still have 10 lugs, and you have the option to still get the double-sided imperial lug, which has a rubber gasket behind it, or tube lugs if you prefer that instead. They also come equipped with Ludwig's P88 AC throw-off, which has the locking notches for the fine tuning knob. That way, if you are a heavy hitter, you don't have to worry about your snare wires coming loose as you play. And of course, the P35P butt plate. Ludwig still offers the Supraphonic in two variations, the 5x14, which is known as the LM400, and a 6.5x14, which is known as the LM402. The best part about the modern day Supraphonics is that you can get them how they were back then, which is that smooth shell with the bead in the middle, or you can get them as a hammered shell as well. So I'd like to know, do you have a Supraphonic in your collection? And if so, is it a modern day Supraphonic, or is it one from the 60s? Maybe even the 70s. Perhaps you have multiple Supraphonics. Either way, I'd love to know. So let me know in the comment section below. Also, if you have any other additional questions about the Supraphonic, feel free to leave them in the comment section as well, and I will try my best to answer them. Now, if you want to see some of the earlier videos from the Snare Saturday series, I've put a link to the playlist in the description below, and I'll also have it come up right here just to make it a bit easier for you. And if you would like to hear the Ludwig chrome over brass snare drum or the Supraphonic that you saw in this video through a few more tunings, I put links to those Snare Saturday videos in the description below as well. If you don't have a Supraphonic and you'd like to get a modern day one for yourself, I've put a few affiliate links in the description below. Finally, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure that you give it a thumbs up. That not only makes it a bit easier for others to find the video, it is a free and easy way to support the channel. If you are looking for additional ways to support the channel, you can do so by checking out some of the affiliate links below. You could give this video a super thanks, or consider becoming a member of the channel where you would receive exclusive perks. And that is it. Thank you so much for checking out this video on the evolution of the Ludwig Supraphonic. And until next time, see you later.